It's day 10 or 11 of this task I've set myself of being on here, podcasty-wise, for 90 days. Hello, my name is Mark Manning. I'm sure you know your own. So here I am. I put some candles on tonight and some soft light because it's been a kind of a waste of a day. And I'm annoyed with myself as a result of it because it's so early in the year. But I suppose I should draw some solace from that fact. Hey, it's early. And I've done quite a lot as well. But I'm annoyed with my weight's crept up again. And with my condition, weight is not good. Oh, let me just tone down this mic slightly. But then again, it's the season to be jolly and what have you, so I keep giving myself little excuses. But so today I spent a fair bit in bed, but I had a great night, and I had to be up early as well. Like I had two pints of Guinness over the night, and then a good-sized glass of red wine, all shared with my good friend Stephen, who's been with me forever, over 40 years, and when we get together, it's what life's made of. It's, we just have a great friendship. Rarely has any downs. It's, we're so open with each other. And I think that's the great thing about friendship as well, as Steve can disappear off to, work in the States for long periods of time. And then we just hook up like nothing's happened. We talk on the phone anyway. But so we went to Jack Black last night, not the actor. Jack Black, who runs a company called Mind Store, MINDSTORE. I have their mouse mat down here beside me. And I met with Jack, and I'd been to his seminars on and off, well over 20 years at this stage. I've been to Galway with him, Stillorgan in Dublin, Glasgow. I think we did London as well. Why have I got London in my head? Did I do London? Anyway, I've done several. So it's just great to see the man. And he was kind of setting sail for what he calls, basically the last phase of his life. Now he's, I don't know what he is, mid-60s, late 60s. I'm 60 myself. But I kind of know what he means. I know what he means. It's kind of, the game is up at this age, and you really have to get the most you can out of it and perhaps leave some kind of a legacy. I don't know. Although I would U-turn again and say, listen, the advice I gave earlier in some of these podcasts, be in the now. Now is where life is. And where was my life about 30 years ago? I'd like to discuss that today. But before I do, the subjects for today are grandparents, how much do you know about them, and your first flat or apartment, or plural of same. Do you remember them before you got married? What was that like? So starting off with my grandparents, on my father's side, all as I know is his name was Albert. I have seen a portrait of him. He was quite a dapper man, and he was English. He was from an area called the Wash, which is north east England. Also sometimes known as the most boring place in England, around Hull, the Hull, around that area. That's all I know of him. My late brother, I think, did some research, and I thought, because there's a Manning tree in Essex, I'm a Manning, and it seemed to have a coat of arms which implied that we were merchants, and that sounded quite grandiose. But when my brother did the research, he found we were more likely to be farm labourers. But my father's father, Albert, survived the First World War, and he was in the trenches in France and in Belgium. interestingly, I know Belgium for sure. And he started out as a private, but he came up through the ranks, and somebody sent me some of one of my sister's service records, and he had made it to, he was officer material. So, like his son subsequently, and his grandson, officer material. But he had survived this war, and those of you who know the song It's a Long Way to Tipperary, which was sang in the trenches back from 1914 to 1918, he found it wasn't such a long way, and I don't know what took him to Ireland. Perhaps he met my grandmother in England, I don't know, but she hailed from Tipperary, and her name I think was Gleason, her second name. I can't remember her first name. I don't know too much about her, but she was a school teacher, and he ended up in Tipperary with her. And it was around the time of the War of Independence, and he became the local postmaster down in Neenah in County Tipperary, I think it was Neenah. And despite him having been in the British Army, he learnt about these movements of the Black and Tans. Now, the Black and Tans were a bunch of miscreants sent to fight the IRA and anybody else who was fighting for Irish independence, which we're so, sorry, but I have to get current with you, which we seem so anxious to throw away despite fighting for it for 800 years. But anyway, these guys were sent in by Churchill, of all people, basically to create terror of anybody that was in any way a dissident to the British Crown. And Grandad Albert, because he knew all the locals and had become more Irish than the Irish themselves, he would find out about these raids the Black and Tans were going to do, and he would tip off the populace and possibly the local IRA. I don't know that for sure, but I know he tipped off people to expect a raid. And raids were horrible. I mean, raids often resulted in innocent people being shoved up against a wall and shot dead. And the ironic thing about having survived the war was he died in the early 1930s, I think, of appendicitis, which back then would kill people. It's so common now. Sister has her appendix out, my wife has. You know, it's routine. But back then they hadn't the medication or surgery to treat it properly. So having survived the horror of the Great War, so-called, he died of a relatively mundane illness. I mentioned Belgium earlier on because something really curious happened in the 1980s. We got a letter. The household got a letter from a family in Belgium, and they were making inquiries as to whatever happened to Uncle Albert, as he was known. And they related a story and indeed welcomed any member of the Manning as an honorary member over to their area of Belgium if we ever cared to visit. The letter has long since disappeared. And they related how they had gotten to know him, my grandfather, when he was a squaddy or a young officer or whatever over there, and that they were amazed how kind he was to them. He shared rations or whatever, whatever position of authority he had, he was able to help them out. And they were impoverished at the time, and they were possibly hadn't been invaded by the Germans. And anyway, Uncle Albert was fondly remembered, and they said that every year for years afterwards, so you're talking, I don't know, 10, 15 years maybe, he sent them a turkey at Christmas. So that was him. Don't know much about his wife, the Gleason. Trying to think, I did see a picture of her before she died, but it was like a mass memorial card. And I think, by the way, if you're waiting on my story about moving out and the first digs and apartments and flats that I had, I'm going to postpone that because this is going on too long. I'll do tomorrow. So anyway, she was a school teacher. And I did see she looked very old by the time I saw the mass card. She died sometime in the 1960s, so she would have outlived him considerably, by about 30 years or so. That's all I really know. Occasionally at funerals or the odd wedding, I might come across cousins of mine. Hello, if any of you recognise me. We just star ships in the night. I'm in Dublin, they're wherever. Some are abroad, some are probably down in Tipperary still. And now on my mother's side, it's far more oblique. There's not much until recently had come to light. My mother's people were Rogers, and I'm told there was, wait for it, a French connection. Because Roger, I think, is a French name. I heard they were of French descendancy. And I also, and this is hearsay, but what I heard through my mother, who obviously was more at the cliff face when it came to knowing her background than I was, her people, when they were in France, and possibly even Ireland when they were over, they were quite well-to-do. They were quite wealthy. They were, they were of money. I don't know anything else. And by the way, an awful lot of records when it came to Irish ancestry perished in the War of Independence, when the IRA thought it was a good idea to burn down the Custom House, which housed records of Irish families going back centuries. So much was lost in that time. So these days, all as you have to look at is maybe service records or lore. And there are a couple of censuses as well, one from 1911, and there's another one as well, a very early census. But my mother's mother was married to a guy who I knew as Uncle Billy, even though he'd be my granddad. That's a real Irish thing. And he was a Dubliner. And he came from an area called Dolphin's Barn. Now, maybe through the army connection, because he was in it. He joined in 1922, I think. This was the new Free State, or the new Nationalist Irish Army. He also served in the Fianna, which was kind of like a paramilitary scouts, I think, with nationalistic aspirations or roots. And I did, only in the last few years, see his military records, even his dental records, because through my own connections with the military archives, because I did live in a barracks, thanks to my father, for years, I've gotten to be involved on and off. I've had occasion to visit, including checking out my own father's army records. But yeah, so my mother's mother was from French people. And I know my mother's mother died in the 1970s, October the 7th. Oh, this is in my head. As I know for a lot of other people it is recently for different reasons. 1973. And she died of a heart-related... hey, listen, it goes down the line, doesn't it? Because I have that kind of a condition. And it was misdiagnosed angina. And she was believing in faith healers and all this kind of stuff, and had wasted a lot of time and money, apparently. And they were diagnosing her for something completely different than was actually the case, which was a heart condition. The seventh son of a seventh son. I do know the name, but I'm not going to say it, just in case there's any relatives still alive of this particular faith healer. But when she married my grandfather, the family disowned her. Now, I think at one stage, my grandfather was, as well as being in the army, but he might have owned a pub or something. I don't know, but it was the thing about you can't marry a publican. That comes into my head. I don't know anything else about that. I actually think he was more a farmer. But I do remember that she was disowned because she married a publican. Now, would that be maybe another name for commoner? I don't know, but they disowned her, and she raised 10 or 11 kids very close to the poverty barrier, which a lot of people were back then anyway. It was nothing new for people. And this was all in Kildare. She was in Kildare, and I think my grandfather met her through his army background, because the Curragh is a big military base in Kildare. I think my grandfather as well, on my mother's side, I think he was quite mechanical, and he was a mechanic within the army. I did see 2 portraits of them, and he was quite... They used to say he looked like Elvis. Now, very few people look like Elvis, but I could kind of see with the facial structure, which obviously didn't carry through the genes, because I'm more akin to Mr. Tato, which is an Irish brand of crisps here, or chips as you say in the States. But so there you go. That's all I know of them. So I know roughly the areas, some background. My grandfather, my father's side, as far as I know, I know he was in the Guards. Now, that means police here in Ireland, but he was in the Guards in England. That was his regiment, or his... So it could have been the Coldstream Guards. He was definitely of the Guards. So look, I don't know. Do you know much about yours? Tomorrow, if the Lord spares me, so I've calmed things down here. I'm going to do some meditation now in a minute. I've some candles burning. I've showered. I've shaved. I got out of the funk that I was in, because even though I had a great night last night. Oh, the other thing is I am booked out, which is great. It's been quite lucrative as well with voiceover work. So I will do stuff, but I pretty much have 2 big jobs on the table with 4 to 6 weeks to complete them. So I've kind of bought time, and I think one of them, they've paid in advance, and it's good money. It's very good, you know. It's thousands, right? And it's always good when it's thousands. Yeah. So I'm going to do it wisely. I'm going to get up early in the morning. I'm going to do the reads, the narration, but I'm going to combine it with a bit of eating properly, because I'm annoyed with myself. So I'm off the drink now. I've decided, anyway, till the end of the month, because I drink 3 nights a week, generally Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The odd time we'll throw something in on a Tuesday, but it's the odd time. It's kind of 3 on, 4 days off. And my consumption is about 2 glasses of red, at the most 3, but generally 2 and a bit. But it's not good for me. I can see the freaking fat head coming back. Sugar, of course, is bad for your heart. Listen, I'm even boring myself. I'd love to hear from you, either in the comments below, because that'll give me a little bit of inspiration to keep going, and the going is hard, but I'm in for the long haul. And advice, I mean, anything you want. And if you want to there's a nice little email as well, thismuchistrue at protonmail.com. Thismuchistrue at protonmail.com. I shall put the link down the bottom of the description here. You can have a look. So anyway, look, that was my grandparents. I'm sorry if it was a boring story, but I thought I'd get them out of my system, because I need to think more often. And God, it would be so interesting, wouldn't it, if you can go to your great-grandparents? That would be nice. But I don't think there's much records, or many records, in respect of same. Take care, 'cause I care, folks.